My name is Thaddeus Paskert, and I work in the Office of College Aid here at the University of Chicago. Also joining me today is our Associate Director, who's in the back, Mike McGinn, and we also have representatives from the Bursar's office that'll be presenting later on in the presentation. Today we'll be talking about financial matters, both the function of our office, the College Aid office, and the Bursar's office. We do ask that everybody please hold all questions till the end. All five of us will come up here and we'll do our best to answer questions both Bursar related and financial aid related. So, beginning. We are in the Office of Financial Aid. Our primary function is to help determine need-based aid eligibility, both through the use of the federal aid application and the institutional aid application. If you visit our website, financialaid.uchicago.edu, your students being undergrads would want to select the undergraduate option, and it'll bring them to all the undergraduate information. The site's very useful. It does have a lot of general information, our awarding philosophy, information about costs, budgets, things of that nature. So if you had a lot of general questions, you might find some of your answers there. That said, if you do have any specific questions or just want to reach out to us, we're always open from 8:30 till 5, Monday through Friday. We have no appointment schedule. If you want to just walk in, you can do that. So we're very, very happy to help. So our office, there's our mission, which I'll go over in a little bit. The services that we provide is the determination of state, federal, and institutional aid admission. For the folks that are Illinois residents, you may be familiar with something called the Illinois MAP grant. That's a grant that's offered to the state of Illinois. For everybody else, unfortunately, most state awards don't translate into Illinois. But if you're an Illinois resident, one thing to keep in mind for the following year is do your FAFSA as early as possible, and I'll cover that in a little while. We do application assistance, so if you're running into any issues with any of the institutional aid application, the CSS profile if you wanted to complete that, or the FAFSA application, or just anything else, please do reach out to us. We also do special circumstances review, which we'll cover later in the presentation. And then, of course, assist with all kinds of questions. If you have financial aid questions, obviously, please do contact our office. But if you're looking to get other things answered that may be financial aid related, and you're not sure who to contact, you can contact our office, and we'll do our best to put you in touch with the right individuals. So our mission and our no barriers philosophy means that we want to make sure that we cover 100% of a student's demonstrated financial need. If your student indicated that they were going to apply for need-based financial aid during their admissions process, there's no application fee to apply to the institution. We do have funded opportunities for a lot of students. For students that are heavily needed, and maybe if your student is in the group called Odyssey Scholars, they're guaranteed a first-year paid internship. And then, of course, lifelong career support. Our career development office is very robust, and they work very heavily with students early on in their college career. We're a little bit different here at UChicago, that they want to work with students when they're first and second-year students and gradually usher them into the professional world. So by the time they've hit the fourth year, they're ready to go. A lot of other institutions may build that process up over the time that the students enrolled, but we really want to work with them as soon as we possibly can. And those benefits can include like career workshops, externships, resume writing, things of that nature. So that's just one of the other bonuses of going here to UChicago. Our no barriers and our no loan philosophy means that we don't factor in what a student might be able to borrow in the way of student loan eligibility when calculating their financial aid. Students can still make use of federal loan eligibility if they wish to do so, but that's not something that we factor in that they'd have to or need to borrow. So how we determine how financial aid is awarded? Well, we look at a few different things. Their cost of attendance, the family contribution, and then the work expectation. I like to give the example of, think of the student's cost of attendance as a glass of water. In this particular instance, the glass of water is about $78,000 tall. And the first thing we look at is how that's made up. And that's made up of two kinds of costs, direct and indirect costs. A direct cost is something the student has to pay. Tuition, fees, room and board when they're on campus. But we also factor in indirect costs, things that they might pay. Books, supplies, personal items, things of that nature. That makes up the total cost. Then we look at the family contribution, and that's looked at through a few different vehicles. One, the FAFSA application, the federal aid application. Two, our institutional aid application, or CSS profile if the student completed that. And then submission of the parent tax documentation. That helps us to determine what what the family's strength or ability to pay might be. Then there's a work expectation, and that is either work that the student's done over the summer. Generally, we assume around $2,000 for a first year, and then work eligibility while they're actually here on campus. Generally, it's around $3,000 in federal work study or student employment. The cost of attendance is that set amount. We put in the family contribution, we put in the work expectation, and then the remaining amount of that glass is what we fill up with need-based financial aid. And that is UC grant funding, Odyssey scholarship funding, things of that nature. So our example financial aid award, this is how we calculate the cost of attendance. The direct costs, tuition, student life fee, and the UPass and the class fee and room and board, those are things that would appear on a billing statement and that you would have to pay to the institution. And then the other things, books and supplies and personal expenses, are things that we budget for. For example, we assume that most students would have around $600 per term expense for books. Obviously, if your student is a science major, it might be more, a little bit more. If they're a literature major, it might be a little bit less, but these are the general numbers that we have. So our estimated cost of attendance for next year would be around $78,555. If a family is exceptionally needy enough, and just including the work expectation and a very nominal family contribution, the vast majority of their direct costs could be covered, and you'd have a very, very small amount to pay out of pocket. So again, the example I gave with the glass of water, we take the cost of attendance, a parent and student contribution that's factored in via the FAFSA and the institutional aid application, and then the self-help, the work expectation, and then that shows demonstrated financial need. All things being the same, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, financial aid awards here tend to remain pretty consistent from year to year. So if a family finances remain generally the same, parents see 2 to 3% raises per year, the household size is the same, and any number that you might have in college being the same, while the cost of attendance can increase from year to year, that financial aid, since it's need-based, is always going to be chasing after that cost of attendance. Obviously, there are things that can affect that family contribution. As I mentioned, income earned from work, so if there's a very large increase in pay, that could result in the family contribution going up a little bit. If you had multiple individuals in college this year, when your student is here as a first year, that graduate, move out of the house, go on to grad school, things of that nature, that's something that can also result in that cost of attendance changing, or that expected contribution changing, and could change that demonstrated financial need, and that's what we award up to. As I mentioned earlier, students aren't required to take out loans, and that's something that we don't factor into their aid package, but they can make use of federal loans if they want to supplement that family contribution. Students can make use of something called a subsidized or unsubsidized federal student loan through the Direct Student Loan Program. If they've completed a FAFSA application, all they need to do is go to the studentloans.gov website and complete the master promissory note and the entrance counseling. That's the loan agreement between the federal government and like a quiz, so they know what their rights and responsibilities are. As a first-year student, your student can borrow $5,500. Second-year students can borrow $6,500, and third and fourth-year students can borrow $7,500. There's no cosigner required. There's no credit requirement. They would receive those funds. Parents can borrow something called a PLUS loan, or parent loan for undergraduate students. That can be borrowed up to the student's actually remaining cost of attendance, i.e. everything else left to be paid out of pocket and extra to cover those indirect costs I spoke about. If a parent did borrow a Parent Plus loan up to the maximum cost, it would very likely would generate a refund, and that refund then could be used to cover the books, personal supplies, transportation, things of that nature. All that said, parents and students don't need to borrow the maximum amount. If you want to borrow a specific targeted amount, you can do that. For example, if a student only wants to borrow, if eligible, subsidized funds, those are interest-free student loan funds, they could just borrow the interest-free funds. If you know my balance or my student's balance is going to be $5,000 per term, I want to borrow a $10,000 loan and then pay a little bit extra out of pocket per term, you can do that as well. Our renewal process is fairly simple. The first thing, of course, is to complete a FAFSA application. That is going to be available October 1st, which is in probably just over a week, literally the first day of school. I know most of your students and yourself are probably in the process of getting moved into the dorms, getting all revved up and ready for the start of the school year, and the last thing on your mind is reapplying for aid for next year. But do not worry. At the end of February, beginning of March, generally in the spring term, we do send out an email correspondence to all students letting them know the aid application process for the following year is now open. Please go complete a FAFSA application. Please complete our institutional aid application. Please provide the parent tax documentation. I stress that it is being corresponded directly to the student. Most, if not all, information coming out of our office, and especially a lot of other offices on campus, primarily go to the student. So parents, I'd encourage you to remain in contact with your student throughout the year. Ask them, hey, have you received any emails from the Bursar, the financial aid office, or any other department on campus? Because we're primarily only going to send that information just to the student. We do realize that all of you have done a lot of work and a lot of great assistance to get your students to the point where they're enrolled in the University of Chicago. But we're in a process now where we're kind of taking the reins, and these students are getting ready to enter into adulthood, so they're going to receive the vast majority of the communication. For the renewal process, again, we would require a financial aid worksheet. For anybody that's completed a CSS profile, you can complete that again if you wish to do so. For returning students, I would encourage you, when your students do become returning, to do the institutional aid application. One, it's considerably shorter than the CSS, and two, it's free to complete. It's based right in the UC system, so if you wanted to do that, that takes about 10 or 15 minutes. We would also, again, require the 2019-20 FAFSA, which would make use of federal or the tax documentation from 2017. As the FAFSA, as our institution always uses prior tax data. If there are extenuating circumstances, which I'll talk about in a little bit, those are things that might allow you to submit more recent tax data. We may require some additional documentation once we do receive initial information from you, just for clarification. If we do require that, of course, we'll always reach out to the student. And as I said earlier, if the household income, resources, and size remain relatively consistent, that financial aid award should remain relatively consistent over the time of your students here. One of the other things that we do have available is something called a net price calculator, or NPC. That is available on our website. That will give you an overall idea of what the aid package might be for this current year, if you want to enter in your current data, or for future years. So if you know 2 years from now, when my student's a third year, I'm going to have another in college, and it's going to use 2018 data, you can visit our net price calculator, put in what you think you're going to have for 2018, indicate that you're going to have multiple members in college, and it might give you an idea of what that aid package might be 2 years from now. We always encourage students and parents to use that to give them an idea of what the aid might do, especially if there's going to be large changes, and to check that out. The special considerations that I mentioned, we do make an allotment if a student does move off campus. All first years are currently required to live on campus, but future years, sometimes students decide to move off. An on-campus student for the first year, we budget in their cost of attendance around $16,500 for living on campus. When students move off campus, it goes down to around $12,500. So the university's deemed it a little bit more affordable to live off campus than on. So if you remember that glass I talked about earlier about our cost of attendance, the glass gets about $4,000 shorter. So if everything else remains consistent, the family contribution that we're pouring in there, the work expectation that we're pouring in there, there's around $4,000 less room for financial aid. That said, the amount that your student is going to be charged by the institution, the direct cost of room and board, goes down about $16,000. So if your student is exceptionally needy or receiving a very generous aid award, they would very likely receive a refund to cover indirect costs, now living off campus, the cost of rent and food, to supplement off-campus residency. We do also make allotments for study abroad programs. So if a student is going to do a study abroad term or an entire year, that would also affect that student's cost of attendance. And they may be eligible for a little bit more in the way of need-based financial aid. If your student isn't interested in doing a study abroad term, we always encourage them to reach out to our office, let them know what program they're thinking of going into, and we can counsel them to see how their aid might be impacted by that, what they might have to pay, or what, hopefully what kind of refund that they might be able to get. The other special circumstances that we do take into consideration are fortunately not great ones, but we are here to help. So if there has been any extraneous things, such as loss of household income due to a decrease of employment or complete loss of employment, financial burdens due to natural disasters, significant medical costs that you're paying out of pocket outside of insurance, essentially things that families have no control over and aren't really reportable on the FAFSA application or the institutional application, please do reach out to us. We do take many things into consideration. Like I said, next year is going to use 2017 tax documentation, or even this year, if you have your 2017 information and it's more indicative of what your family finances are, please do reach out to us. We understand that there's things that you just don't have control over and want to work with you to see if that will result in any kind of aid change. I always do say, though, whatever your student's aid package is, assume that's what it might end up being and plan accordingly. But if you needed to reach out to us, please do so. Some students do have something called federal work study or just a student employment allotment. If they go to studentemployment.uchicago.edu, they can click on the undergraduate button and it'll bring them to a section about undergraduate employment. Part of our financial aid philosophy is the work expectation for the student. If a student has federal work study, what that is that is a government grant, but it's something that's earned through employment. So if you're looking at your student's financial aid award and saying this federal work study hasn't dispersed yet or it hasn't been applied to the account, that's actual work that they do need to do and earn that in a biweekly paycheck. The bonus of being a federal work study student is it makes them more desirable to employers. The government will cover 75 cents on the dollar on the employer side for a work study student, so employers want those work study students. If your student doesn't have federal work study, it doesn't mean they'd earn any more or less than a federal work study student, they just might not get as a good a selection of positions. Obviously, we want students, if they have federal work study, to be able to use it, but there's not an expectation that they have to use it. Students can work a maximum of 20 hours per week, but generally most students work between 7 to 10 hours per week. Obviously, we understand that your student's primary responsibility being here at UChicago is to receive a college education, not do student employment. So when it comes time for midterms, finals, papers that need to be completed, they can work with their employer to let them know, hey, I have a big test coming up in 2 days. I know I'm scheduled to be here this afternoon, but I really need to study for it. Employers are going to be understanding of that. They know that's why they're here primarily. So again, if they go to the employment website, they can see their job postings, things that they can apply for. We also have a very robust career advancement office, as I mentioned earlier. They can help students with resume writing, cover letters, things of that nature, coaching for interview positions. We always encourage students, even if they're not going to do student employment on campus, to definitely visit the career advancement office. It's something that if they start off in their first or second year, it's something that's really going to benefit them when they're getting to their third, fourth year and getting ready to go out into the real world. If they do want to do student employment while they're on campus, there are a few pieces of requirement documentation. For students that have federal work study, there's an authorization form that'll be available in their portal showing what their eligibility is. Many employers do want to see that so they know that they're work study eligible. They'll have to complete an I-9 form to show who they are, and then they'll also require proper documentation. So any parent out there that's ever started a new job, you realize you need your Social Security card to get that done. A lot of times for your students, for any of you that are out of state, your student's Social Security card is probably living either in a bank box, folder, or a safe thousands of miles away right now. If your student does want to start employment and they don't have a passport on them, do track down that Social Security card. That's usually the biggest hurdle that students have to get over. They got to call their parent in California going, I need my original Social Security card. So if you know where that is, dig that out if you think they might do some student employment. A couple of financial aid sessions of interest. This upcoming Thursday from 1 to 2 in the Max P Cinema here in this building, there will be representatives from the student employment side talking about the student employment, both federal work study and standard student employment. And then we also have later that day, a student session for financial aid and billing. Very similar to what we're going over here, but more student-centered. I encourage you to encourage your students to attend these sessions so they have a greater understanding of how things work for financial aid and for the billing. Like I said, our primary form of communication is always going to be directly to your students. We encourage you to, definitely maintain an open dialogue and contact with them so they can let you know when documents are required, when bills are due, things of that nature. But, we really want your students to be actively involved as well. So right now I'm going to introduce Phyllis from our Bursar's office, and we'll be discussing Bursar information. And then at the end of the session, we'll open it up to questions. So here's Phyllis.
So the Bursar's office, what we are here primarily to do is to support your students as well as their network, meaning you, their parents, their guardians. And we offer resources and tools to help students learn how to manage their student account, which will translate later on in life to managing their own finances. We also want to make sure that you understand the billing process, the payment options, and so we want to be as transparent as possible and make this process as clear to you as we can. So we help manage your student account by these 4 kind of primary topics: e-billing, authorized users, payment services, as well as refunds. So e-billing, the way that this works is we send notifications via email to your student when their bill is ready for them to view, and they can also authorize you to receive a similar notification when the bill is ready, so that you can not only view but also make online payments. Authorized users can also opt into a 9-month payment plan through your separate portal. Payment services, we have many different types of methods by which you can make payment. And then refunds as well, which Thaddeus touched on, where that occurs when your total resources or payment methods exceed the total charges, resulting in a credit balance. And so if your student is eligible for a refund, we highly encourage you to have them enroll in direct deposit. So this is the path that students would take to view their bill. So they would log into myuchicago.edu, click on the Finances tab, and then as you see, the account and billing is the next step, and then click on eBill ePay. Now eBill ePay, that has many different services under that primary category, and one of the most important ones as it relates to you is the student authorizing you as a user, because the access from a student point of view versus the parent is quite different. So the myuchicago.edu is really the student portal, and authorizing you as a user allows you access to view bills and make payments. It does not authorize you to do anything else. You're not able to see grades or anything like that due to the FERPA regulations, which I'm sure that if you're not familiar with them yet, you soon will be. So the e-bill, what does it include? Well, as we've talked a little bit about, it includes all of the direct charges, not the indirect costs, which would be books and personal expenses, but the primary costs, which are tuition, mandatory fees, room and board, and health insurance, which health insurance is always a big topic, and we can touch on that a little bit more later. But if your student did not waive out of health insurance, that charge will be on their bill each of the 3 quarters. And then the payment resources, these are the different types of payments that your student may or may not have on their bill: financial aid, loans, scholarships, outside scholarships, 529 payments, and any other payments and credits. So this is the view from the student perspective. So they log into myuChicago, and you'll see where the arrow is pointing. And then what they want to do is click on My Account. And these are important steps for your student to authorize you as a user. So this is why I want to focus on how the student would go about doing this. So then they would click on eBill, ePay, and on the same screen, they would also enroll in direct deposit for refund processing. And then you can also see there's a tab for health insurance. So they can also click this tab as well to either waive out of insurance, or they can opt in on the same portal. So what I want to focus on this screen is, if you look on the left side, we talk about your account. And what you see as the current balance, what that represents is the total direct charges. For the first bill that you received, you'll notice that it says pending financial aid. So in this balance, it does not reflect the financial aid that you were awarded. So it's very important that when you're on this screen that you go to the right and you actually view the statement. And that statement looks something like this. So there's the total due in the top summary and down at the bottom. And so all the charges are detailed, and then you see your enrollment deposit. And then below that, all of the types of financial aid. And I just want to point out that you'll notice that the disbursement date is different than the date that the charges were billed. And that has to do with federal rules, regulations that stipulate when financial aid can disperse. So what I really want you to encourage you to do is always look at the bill when determining how much is due, because we don't want you to overpay us, which would just simply mean that we in turn turn would have to return any overpayment back to you. So don't confuse the current balance with the actual statement, especially the first bill of each quarter, due to the regulations that stipulate when financial aid can disperse. So again, this is just recapping what we just looked at. So you have direct charges and then total resources, and the difference is what is due. So you have a total from charges, a total from resources, and the total due is simply the difference. So there are many ways that you can make that payment. You can pay quarterly, which is the standard method of billing. We also have what we call a 9-month payment plan, where you could take that total due for the year, and that would be your 9-month budget. And what would happen is, if you enroll in that option, you would pay this budget over 9 months rather than quarterly. And I want to point out there's a $75 non-refundable enrollment fee associated with that. And then there's also other payment options listed here as well. So if you're paying with international currency, we have a service called Flywire that we partner with, and they guarantee the best rate of exchange for transferring those international monies to US dollars. We also have the option for you to pay in person. We partner with our Maroon Financial Credit Union, and you can go in person to pay. They're not open today, but their normal hours mirror hours, which are Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. You can mail payments to our address. And I know many people have 529 plans, so if you do have one of those, you would want to start by contacting your company, your 529 company, and they would advise you whether they're going to send a paper check to us. In some instances, they can transfer the money to you, and you deposit those in your bank, and then you pay us directly. And there are also some 529 companies that we are partnered with where they require a bill directly from the University of Chicago. Some examples of those would be Florida Prepaid, Texas Tomorrow, Michigan Education Trust, PACT from Alabama. Other than those few, most 529 companies, you deal directly with them. So for these, we do require what we call a third-party contract from the student, but we don't require anything from those 529 companies because we already have a relationship with them. So if you fall into any category of those states, then you could have your child fill out the third-party contract, and you could always call us. We're happy to answer any questions or walk through that. So these are the 3 quarterly billing dates, the production date and the due dates. If you wanted to enroll in a 9-month payment plan, then you would be taken out of this population and put into the 9-month. On these production dates, if you're an authorized user, you will receive an email, as will your student. The bill is not contained within the email, and I know that that can cause confusion sometimes. In fact, what you will be asked to do is to log in through the web address that will be provided to you in the email, and then you will log into the authorized user portal to view the bill and make online payments. So refunds, we talked about that a little bit, but essentially, if the student is eligible for a refund, we highly recommend that they enroll in direct deposit. We can send a paper check, but as all of you probably realize, that process takes it twice as long, so we really encourage your child to enroll in direct deposit to receive the money in half the time, especially if you anticipate they'll need those funds for books and personal expenses. Now, if you are a parent borrowing a PLUS loan, as Thad mentioned earlier, if you're borrowing up to the total cost of attendance, then more than likely you'll receive a refund. And the refund, in the parent's case, will be a paper check. Unfortunately, we're not equipped for direct deposit in that instance. And If you have designated when you applied for the Parent Plus loan that the refund should go to the student, then that information is stored within our own student system, and we will refund the student instead. Otherwise, the parent can expect to receive a paper check to the address that you provided when you applied through studentloans.gov on your Plus application. So these are our hours and our location. We are open for telephone calls Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. and for walk-ins from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And similar to the financial aid office, we do not require appointments. We operate on a walk-in basis for both you and your children. And we also have a lot more detailed information on our website, and so we highly recommend that you visit that regularly and often for the most up-to-date changes.